Hi everyone, welcome to Golden Buckets. In this video, I will discuss another comparison between basketball players. These are players who played in roughly the same era, played arguably the same position. Two great players. If you ask me, when it is all said and done, they will be both top 100 players ever, even though Kyrie Irving was omitted from the top 75 a couple of years ago. So this comparison is between Damian Lillard and Kyrie Irving. And the objective of this comparison is not so much to focus on accolades and necessarily who is greater in terms of achievement, but who do I believe is the better basketball player between the two, who impacts winning more, and who would I draft if I were a GM of a franchise and I had to choose a player to lead my franchise, whether for a 5-year prime, whether for a 10-year career, or a 15-year NBA career, to help my franchise win a championship, independently if it is as a primary or as a secondary role on the team. So let's delve into this comparison. Okay, so Kyrie Irving and Damian Lillard obviously have had very different careers. They're totally different. I'm not so concerned about their accolades. I'm mostly interested in their game. So Damian Lillard spent most of his prime, arguably independently on how you feel about his play with the Bucks, but he played most of his prime, or almost all of his prime, in Portland, in a small market team, where he was the undisputed leader and best player on the team throughout the duration of his career, of his tenure there. He had a few All-Star caliber teammates. Some of them were not really that successful individually in Portland, like LaMarcus Aldridge and CJ McCollum, but all throughout his tenure in Portland, Damian Lillard was never surrounded by any superstar, and at best, he was surrounded by all-star caliber players, particularly Aldridge, who later went on to play for the San Antonio Spurs, and who was a very underrated power forward in his time. Certainly one of the most skilled ones, with the best, arguably with the best mid-range game in the league at the time. But to talk about the profile as a basketball player, Damian Lillard is essentially a combo guard, along with many combo guard or point guards of his era, such as the Kyrie Irvings, the Steph Currys, arguably the best combo guard ever, and many other players who followed later on, such as the Aaron Fox currently. And the combo guard is essentially a hybrid between a point guard and a shooting guard. Essentially, you could argue that a combo guard is a shooting guard or a score-first guard who is slightly undersized, but who could run the offense and initiate plays like a point guard, even though his primary attribute or his primary gift and contribution to a team is mostly on the scoring department than in the playmaking department. So combo guard differentiates themselves from the traditional point guard, like the Jason Kidd, the Steve Nash, the John Stockton, and the Chris Pauls, whose primary role is to play make for the team, set up plays for the team as an overall playmaker, distributor, decision maker, passer, and to assist opportunities for scoring. Combo guards definitely contribute to the playmaking, but not to the same extent as the traditional point guards like the John Stocktons. But they contribute, on the other hand, more as a scorer. And in my opinion, the origins of the combo guard is to be traced to Michael Jordan, because Michael Jordan definitely influenced how perimeter players not only were viewed, but how they approached the game, whereby a player who can get you 30 a night, a superstar who could score with the best players in the league, was definitely the vision of the modern superstars, and even point guards began to value scoring more than traditional playmaking ability, like the Jason Kidd and the Steve Nash in the world, who, for the most part, very few of these traditional point guards were successful in winning titles in NBA history. So the combo guard is definitely a quite recent development, mostly to be traced in the early 2010s with the rise and the drafting of players such as Dame, Steph Curry, Kyrie Irving. But we had similar prototypes earlier on, such as the Gilbert Arenas. And if we even want to go back to the foundation of the league, even to the early 60s, you could argue that Jerry West was the first combo guard in NBA history, a player who could fit into either the point guard and the shooting guard mold, and could balance both playmaking and scoring duties to an exceptional level. However, this position is very varied. There isn't a set criteria for what constitutes a point guard or a combo guard, but just for the sake of this comparison between the two players, let's call both Dame and Kyrie combo guards, and two of the best, certainly, in this sort of NBA position. So what's the difference between the two? So as I stated before, Damian Lillard is a score-first player. He's a player who gets buckets. He's a relentless scorer, by the way, because he's not a scorer that gets satisfied with getting you his 30 points a game. He's someone who pursues scoring to a high degree, like many other players who played in previous eras. A little bit like Kobe Bryant, Dame Lillard is a relentless scorer, not just a good scorer. He's someone who wants to score. He wants to leave his imprint on the game as a scorer. And so he's the type of player that could definitely play make to a good degree, to a good level, but his primary contribution is a scorer. And compared even to other combo guards like Steph Curry and Kyrie Irving, even though quite undersized as a basketball player and as a superstar, Damian Lillard is quite athletic. His game has an element of physical dominance that the Steph and the Kyries don't necessarily have, even though they're both very nimble, very, very gifted in terms of athletic lateral movement, quickness, agility, reflexes. Certainly they don't lack in any of these departments. But Dame's game has an element of athletic ability to a higher degree than a player like Kyrie Irving. So essentially, Damian Lillard is someone who primarily focuses on shooting. So the way he generates points is as a shooter, as a three-point shooter, and very aptly, Damian Lillard wants to be credited as one of the best shooters in NBA history, which in my opinion he undoubtedly is. He can blend several distinct forms of shooting. He's a pull-up shooter. He can shoot like off the dribble. He's very unpredictable, and this is one of the reasons why playing against him in a playoff series it's a very hard task, because Dame has the ability to combine a relentless scoring motor with the ability to shoot very difficult shots, contested, uncontested, from different ranges in the basketball court, and to be able to affect the game, particularly in clutch moments. So as a shooter, and in particularly as a three-point shooter, Damian Lillard is renowned for his long-distance three-pointers, in the same vein as Steph Curry, whereby he's very effective and efficient at taking logo threes. This is one of the reasons why he's also nicknamed as Logo Lillard. And so Dame is not necessarily a mid-range player. He's not a mid-range type of shooter, even though he could resort to that in certain situations. But when you think about the Blazers at their peak, particularly from 2018 to 2021, it was very formidable and fascinating, the duo of Dame and CJ McCollum, because CJ McCollum was one of the players to keep the mid-range shooting alive in an era of analytics where people focused on three-pointers so much. So it was nice to see this dynamic of a mid-range shooter paired with Dame, who's primarily a three-point shooter as a scorer. So Damian Lillard, therefore, is one of the best shooters ever. His gravity in terms of being able to shoot and score from way outside the three-point line, making him a scoring threat that demands the attention of defenders at all times. And the other attribute of his game that makes him different from other combo guards is that he has more athleticism. He's quite able to generate fouls and to attack the rim to a good level, even though he doesn't do it in an explosive manner like a Russell Westbrook or a Prime Rose. But Dame is definitely a good finisher. And therefore, Dame's game is mostly based on three-point shooting, which he's exceptional at that, and the good ability to finish through contact in the lane. Okay, so this is a brief basketball profile of who is Damian Lillard as a basketball player. Primarily a scorer from the three-point line and a gifted finisher at the rim. So let's talk about Kyrie Irving for a second. So Kyrie Irving played in different teams and franchises throughout his career. I would argue that Kyrie Irving is not necessarily in his prime quite anymore, even though he can still score 30 a game in a Dallas uniform. But I would say that Kyrie's prime coincided with his stint in Cleveland, Boston, and the Nets. So he was in his prime in those franchises. And what is interesting is that in at least two of these franchises, he was never the number one option. In Cleveland, it was LeBron's team. LeBron was the primary option. Kyrie Irving was his secondary scoring option, who at times, due to LeBron's ability, style of leadership, and playmaking gravity, at times Kyrie Irving could score more than LeBron if that was how the game was, how to say, game plan was established, but also due to Kyrie Irving's ability to rise to the occasion in do-or-die situations. We've seen this multiple times, particularly in the finals against the Golden State Warriors in 2016, that led to the 3-1 comeback from Cleveland. So Kyrie Irving, for most of his prime, Cleveland and New York and the Brooklyn Nets, where he was a secondary option to Kevin Durant, sometimes the third option behind James Harden, even though the three of them rarely played together. And he was a number one option in Boston, even though that wasn't a successful tenure by any means. In fact, Jason Tatum was a rookie and a sophomore. Was a sophomore the year that he was a rookie in 2018, a sophomore in 2019, and the tenure in Boston by Kyrie Irving was quite an unsuccessful one. In fact, there were clashes of ego in the team. The team was a little bit dysfunctional, lacked a precise identity of a pecking order in terms of who was the number one, number two, number three options. Roles were not very well established, and the team even performed much better without Kyrie Irving than with him. So, but I'm not making this video necessarily to compare exactly what transpired in each tenure of each of these two basketball players, but mostly to focus on their game. So this is the first difference between Dame and Kyrie. Kyrie was most of his prime, if we exclude Boston and we focus on Brooklyn and Cleveland, he was a number two option, while Dame was a number one option. So Dame played the role of a KD, of a LeBron for his team. He was a number one player, he was a leader, he was the primary decision maker, he was a locker room guide, let's say. So this is the number one difference between these two players. One is primarily a number one option, and the other is a number two option. Now let's focus on their game. And after that, I will try to determine who I think is a better basketball player and who will I draft if I were GM. So now let's focus on Kyrie's game for a second. So Kyrie's game is very different from Dame. It's totally different, even though they are both incredibly skilled. So as I stated before, Kyrie Irving's game, even though he's incredibly gifted in terms of agility, lateral quickness, reflexes, and anticipation, his game is less reliant on athletic ability. Even though I'm not describing Dame as a D Rose type of player, but Kyrie's game is a little bit less predicated on athleticism and more on the ability of blend skill and finesse. When you think about Kyrie Irving, above all players in the league, you think about skill and finesse. He combines these two elements to a high level, to a high degree. And what differentiates Kyrie's game from Dame and Steph is that Kyrie's game is more similar to a Kobe in many ways, even though he doesn't have the athletic ability of Kobe or the size of Kobe Bryant or his defensive motor. But offensively, his game is more similar to Kobe. That means although Kyrie is an exceptional three-point shooter, and he has proven that over the years, Kyrie's game is not primarily predicated on that. So Kyrie excels at three-point shooting, but when you think about Kyrie, you don't think about three-pointers first. You think about, in a similar vein to Kobe, you think about Kyrie as a prototypical three-level scorer, like Kevin Durant in many ways. He's a scorer, a three-level scorer, who also excels at three-point shooting. But I wouldn't say three-point shooting is the bread and butter of his game. In fact, I do believe that Kyrie distinguishes himself for being able to balance the various facets of scoring, and to even incorporate a high degree of mid-range game, which, like his idol Kobe Bryant, really mastered that aspect of the game, and which many, I have to say, point guards of this era, particularly combo guards like the Steph, the Dames, but even the players like the Westbrooks, the Hardens, really neglected a little bit the mid-range game because they focused mostly on finishing and the three-point game. So in this regard, we can say that Kyrie is a little bit of a throwback player because his game is very balanced between all facets. Mid-range to a high degree, but also exceptional finisher and also very adept and great three-point shooter. So their basketball profile is totally different. Whereas Dame is a blend between primarily scoring from the three-point line to the finishing, Kyrie is more well-rounded. So if you are, let's say, scouting or playing against Kyrie in a playoff setting, you don't really know what Kyrie is going to give to you. This makes him more unpredictable because Kyrie Irving's ability to not only to take players off the dribble, to find the best possible shot for himself, to get his shot off in any setting, makes him, in my opinion, more unpredictable to scout against and also to stop in do-or-die situations, such as in the clutch. Whereas Dame, as a defender, you almost know beforehand how he's going to impact the game and what type of shots he's going to aim for in a playoff series or in a basketball game. So the nature of their two games are totally different. One thing they both have in common is none of them is a good defensive player. Seeing their average is probably complementing them, since none of them play much of a defensive role, even though I wouldn't use a disparaging term to describe their defense. I would say it's okay given the position. Combo guards are rarely known for playing good defense, and this is a trait common not just to these two players, but to most players at their position, including Steph, Luka, Harden, and many more players. So Trae Young, none of these players are really good defenders. So I don't fault these players for it. So, and they're both quite undersized. Kyrie is slightly taller than Dame, but none of these two players is really big. Like some of the shooting guards of former eras who inspired their game. In fact, as I stated before, Kyrie modeled his game after Kobe, but Kobe was substantially bigger, taller, and more athletic. And so Kobe had the height to potentially play the forward position, while Kyrie Irving, being undersized, cannot feed the three and not even the two, but he plays combo guard as a point guard, essentially. So these players, and another thing they have in common is that even though their shot profile and their type of scoring ability is a little bit is quite different, they are both score-first players. So Kyrie Irving, like Damian Lillard, is not necessarily looking to pass. As a combo guard, he's more as a scorer type of player. He's someone who's going to finish at the rim with crafty layups, crafty finishing moves. He's going to take a mid-range, pull up from three. But none of these two players is a pass-first guy. Even though I believe that Dame is more of a little bit more as a passer and a more willing facilitator than a Kyrie Irving. While Kyrie Irving is more the prototypical one-on-one scorer, Dame is more a scorer with the highest usage rate on his team, but he's also someone who sets the table more for his teammates than Kyrie. Kyrie is mostly plays like a pure scorer than even a Dame who can oftentimes average 8-10 assists in a playoff setting. So these are the primary differences between the two players. And now I will try to delve into the discussion on who will they take between these two players. So this is quite a difficult question for some reason. So as I stated also in my other videos, I really value the intangibles of a basketball players and the leadership component to it. And it is true that examining a basketball player's tenure, successes and failures in different teams is not the be-all end-all in a basketball comparison, but it can be useful to inform us on what the track record of a player is and whether the successes or failures that this player had is partly attributable to their style of leadership and their ability to engage with their teammates, their basketball identity and inclination and so forth. So to make a long story short, if I were to draft a basketball player between these two to lead my franchise, it will be Damian Lillard, because even though their level as basketball players is comparable, in some areas you will give the edge to Dame, in some areas you give the edge to Kyrie. I do believe that Dame's ability to impact the team as a whole, whether as a locker room figure, whether as a leader on the court, whether as a floor general, and impact winning in particular, is much higher than a player like Kyrie. So I know this is a difficult comparison to make because it can seem as if I'm diminishing Kyrie Irving when I'm not, because I think his game is sublime and exceptional, and I do believe he will likely beat Dame in a one-on-one game. But to me, this is not too different from the comparison between a Paul Pierce and a Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony may be individually better, but as a leader for your team, your franchise, Paul Pierce can lead your team to higher results, in my opinion, than a Carmelo Anthony. And this is not too different in this respect. While I do believe that you could make the argument that Kyrie Irving may be individually better in terms of overall skill sets, I do believe that I do believe that Damian Lillard will lead your franchise to more wins, more playoff series wins. He has the ability to galvanize all of his teammates and to carry his team further than a player like Kyrie Irving did. And I just want to make a disclaimer, okay? I do believe that Kyrie Irving has been oftentimes disrespected by the media and maligned, okay? And I don't use the media's depictions of him against him, because I do not believe Kyrie is culpable for everything. Even the story of the vaccine, I do believe he made his own determinations on not taking the vaccine, so I do not blame him for not taking it. But on the other hand, when you look objectively at his track record, you cannot deny that for as talented as he was, Kyrie Irving didn't impact winning to the degree that his stature as a basketball player would suggest that he should do. And I make a few examples. So before LeBron came into Cleveland, even though he was very young, Kyrie, he was in his early 20s. Until then, he did not achieve any playoff success with leading the franchise, the Cavs, okay? Then when he goes and departs to Boston, Boston are argued in the media as the biggest challenge potentially to the Warriors dynasty, as Boston had a talent advantage over all other teams in the East, including the Cavs with LeBron. And in 2018, Kyrie Irving gets injured, so he doesn't play. The same for Gordon Hayward. But as you will see, Boston is so talented that they go to the Western Conference Finals, facing the Cavs, playing a seven-game series, and being one game away, literally, one victory away from going to the finals and facing the Warriors. Then in 2019, the vibe seems to be more optimistic because the team is getting Kyrie Irving back. And people argue, okay, now that you add Kyrie Irving to a team that has just gone to the Western Conference Finals to 7 games, that team is likely to go to the finals now in 2019. And to give the Warriors, who by the way in 2019 are not playing as well as the previous 2 years, a run to their money. But you see that once Kyrie gets incorporated into the team seems to get worse and worse because of these issues in terms of leadership, in terms of roles, in terms of ego, dysfunction. And in the Bucks Celtics series in 2019, Kyrie Irving has one of the worst playoff series, by a star or a superstar player. So, and in that series, by the way, the Boston Celtics had a much more talented team. Even though Giannis was MVP in 2019, I do believe that the Celtics had a better roster, and in my opinion, they should have won that series. And I do not believe that Dame would have crumbled in that situation. I do not believe that Dame would have worsened it. A very strong team like the Celtics were in those years. Then when Kyrie goes to Brooklyn, he doesn't seem to have a noticeable impact without winning because the team as a whole seemed to perform better when he's off the floor. And even though I do not blame him in the slightest for his stance to not get vaccinated, in 2022, in 2022 when the Celtics sweep the Brooklyn Nets, most experts were picking the Brooklyn Nets to potentially win the series and to go to the finals because they had Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant both in the same team with a very good supporting cast when you think about the role players they had. And the team does not even get a win against the Celtics and they get swept. When you compare all of these things with what Dame has done, his ability to lead the team to the conference finals in 2019, even though I can argue that in Game 7 of the conference semifinals against Denver, CJ McCollum was clearly the better player in that game, averaging I think close to 37 a game in Game 7 against Denver. But even if we leave that game aside, Dame has shown multiple times that he's more reliable than Kyrie Irving. He performs better, and he exceeds expectations compared to Kyrie, who underachieved expectations in several scenarios. So for all of these reasons, I do believe that choosing Dame over Kyrie as a player I will draft for my franchise isn't a difficult choice for me. So I will definitely choose Dame over Kyrie as a number 1 option on my team. However, there is a caveat, okay? What if I'm a GM of a team that already has a superstar and already has a number 1 option that is decidedly better than both Kyrie Irving and Damian Lillard, and I had to choose a number 2 option? In that situation, I will likely take Kyrie because Kyrie Irving's, while his weaknesses get exposed and manifested, particularly on the leadership front, when he's entrusted into a number 1 position, I do believe that when he is a clear-cut number 2 option, and there is a leadership pecking order in the team, where you have a guy like the LeBron, who is the number 1 option and the leader of the team, I do believe that then Kyrie Irving's strengths can get maximized to their fullest potential, as it happened in Cleveland in 2017 and 16 when they won the title. Well, it is not necessarily that I don't think that Dame can fit as a number 2 option, because I believe he could. I do believe that Kyrie Irving's game, that is less ball dominant, he can play off the ball a little bit better, And while he doesn't have the same range of shooting that Dame possesses, I do believe that Kyrie in his best games, maybe particularly in a second, as a second star on a team, I do believe his shooting could be more impactful than Dame's if he plays as a number 2 option. So if I were to draft between the two, but I already had a superstar on my franchise, and I needed to draft a second player, and I had to choose between Dame and Kyrie, then I will choose Kyrie Irving as a number 2 option, because Kyrie Irving, as I stated before, is a little bit better as an off-ball player, and he has a skill set that very few number 1 options have, in terms of being a 3-level scorer who can also be great in the mid-range area. And I believe his skill set is perfect to pair with the number 1 player, with the superstar of the highest order, because it will generate and complement the offense to a tremendous level. And Kyrie Irving's game being so complete as a scorer in a playoffs game where the game is drawing towards the end and you need a few buckets to win the game, I do believe that his ability to be unpredictable might give him the edge over Dame in that scenario. So let's say you have a player like Jokic, for instance, okay? And he's your number 1 option. And you had to pair him with either Dame or Kyrie. I do believe that if you have Kyrie on the team as a number 2 option, is probably the best choice, because Kyrie Irving's unpredictability in terms of skill set and shooting different ways of scoring will make him better, in my opinion, as a number 2 option than a Dame, who's primarily ball dominant and has a higher usage. So, to make a long story short, if I were to draft between the two players as a superstar, and I needed a superstar to lead my team, whether for a 5-year prime, whether for 10 years or 15 years, I will draft Damian Lillard. But if I already had a bona fide superstar, number 1 option on my team, and I'm drafting between these two players, and I need a second type of best player on a championship team, then I'm drafting Kyrie Irving. Now, before concluding my video, I just want to make a disclaimer that in terms of clutchness, I do believe these two players are almost evenly matched, and are arguably 2 of the 3 most clutch players of this era, arguably. They are even more clutch than the number 1 superstars in the league, like the Stephen Currys, the Kevin Durant's, the LeBron James, the Anthony Davis, the Giannis Antetokounmpos, the Luka Doncic of the world. These two players differentiate themselves from the pack for being exceptional clutch players, both of them. If you ask me who do I think is more clutch, we are splitting hairs, because Kyrie Irving had one of the most clutch series I've ever seen in 2016 when they beat the Warriors. I think he had the game where he had 41 points, which was game 5. He had 41 points on 70% shooting. He was making all the shots down the stretch. Plus his game winner in game 7 against Steph Curry to win the first title in Cleveland Cavaliers history was probably one of the clutchest shots I've ever seen by a basketball player. On the other hand, however, Dame has also shown the ability to be very clutch, very decisive, very strong-minded, very unfazed down the stretch of games. He shot the game winner against Houston in 2014. He shot the game winner against OKC that sent OKC home and led to the Paul George trade, I think. I think it was 2018. So that was a masterful moment for Damian Lillard. So I would say they're evenly matched in terms of clutchness. But for all the reasons I stated in the video, if I were to draft a player as a number 1 option, I'm going with Dame. If I needed a player as a number 2 option, I'm going with Kyrie. So guys, let me know who do you think is better. Who would you draft for a 5, 10, 15-year prime as a number 1 option? And who would you draft instead if you already had a superstar and you needed another star to pair him with? Okay guys, thank you for watching. Bye.